Welcome to VG Picks, the best horror games, a sort of non-list feature, list feature type thing. I'm joined by Stephen W. Burns.
Hello.
Who is well into horror games. You've got a few games that you want to talk about. You want to start off with Silent Hill 2.
Well,
why is Silent Hill 2 one of the best horror games?
One of the best games ever made. Quite possibly the only adult video game. You know, in video games, they're like, oh, it contains adult themes or mature. It just means there are boobs and there are blood. Like, is Mortal Kombat an 18 for any other reason than those two things?
Yeah.
No. So I think it's testament to the game's design and its resonance with the players that even all these years after it released, like the series can't escape from that, you know, from Silent Hill 2's success. A lot of people are always calling back to it. And even games that I actually quite liked later on in the series, especially Downpour, which has some similar themes. People are like, yeah, but it's not Silent Hill 2, is it? And what's interesting is that Silent Hill and Silent Hill 3 and Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill The Room, they are like thematically linked. So it's kind of the mythology is broken down into two parts, really. That one of them is this overarching kind of cult thing of why cult, as in, you know, I mean, like not a religion, the one down from that, about why Silent Hill is why it is as it is, whereas 2, even though it has elements of that, is about purely psychological elements from the person who's in Silent Hill. It's not aged very well, in particular with regards to its controls, but because they weren't any good then. Silent Hill 2 in particular is influenced, and the team have recognised this, they've said it, by the 1990 film Adrian Lyne, Jacob's Ladder, which if you haven't seen, don't let anyone tell you anything about it. Just go and watch it. And Jacob's Ladder is one of the best horror movies I've seen. If you've not played Silent Hill 2, pretty much go into it blind. It's a psychological horror game, and the best version is probably on PC, if you can make your pad work.
And also, I guess, be aware that it hasn't necessarily aged very well.
Yeah, in some regards. In others, it's still absolutely terrifying. So we'll move on to a game called Clock Tower, Jim. Now, you must have heard me rambling on about this in the office. We're going to talk about the original version on the SNES, and then we're going to talk about the PlayStation version, also called Clock Tower, but not Clock Tower, The First Fear, which is the updated SNES version. The original version, the original installment in the series, and there are quite a few after that, is it was published by Human Entertainment.
Right, okay.
Yeah, on the SNES in 1995. So, you know, late in the lifespan of that console.
The last gas. 16-bit.
And so you play as a girl called Jennifer Simpson, and she is an orphan, and her and some other girls are adopted by a wealthy family. And you go to the mansion, and then it turns out that really things haven't turned out quite the way you think. You are chased by a guy called Scissor Man, who has a big pair of scissors. So, yes.
Is he a fucking Mega Man boss?
pretty much, and like he's, you know, horrifically scarred. What I really love about the original Clock Tower and its PlayStation sequel is it's one of those games where it's like a point and click game, and when you don't have a gun, and when Scissor Man attacks you, he can attack from anywhere really as you're walking around the mansion, but you don't have any real strength to fight him off. You can only use implements in the world, and if you get caught, you die. So there are bits where you'll go into for example, a bathroom, and he may come out from behind the shower curtain and all of that sort of thing. And it's quite crude, but what it does is it does atmosphere really, really well. So you're walking around this mansion, and after it goes wrong in the opening few minutes, it's not that long. You can complete the game in about an hour, but it's all on you. And this is especially true of the PlayStation version, just called Clock Tower as well, in that the game has various endings from like S rank or A rank down through E. But the one which you think you would want, so everyone survives, that's not the right one. And even the director of the game said in the back of the game's manual on PlayStation, said that the A ending or the top ending is the Hollywood ending. And you shouldn't aspire to get to that, because horror games, like horror films, part of the enjoyment is in watching people get chopped up. And to play the game that way is to play against the spirit of horror games. And so in the PlayStation version of Clock Tower, your game can end really early, but that's the ending you get. That's your and that's the one that will stick with you. That's your first ending, and sure, you can play it through again. and go through the scenarios, and you know, okay, I know not to open that door because that may trigger something later on. A game that it's really similar to, and we can talk about this now, is Until Dawn. If you imagine Until Dawn as the 21st century version of Clock Tower, but with a different bad guy and a slightly different twist on proceedings, they're very similar in that regard, in that the game wants you to play less as the actor and more as the director. It wants you to shepherd people into different roles and choose who you want to die. And that's why in Until Dawn, I was a bit sad that I didn't get like everyone out of the game, but at the same time I thought no, because that's how it should be. You don't have a horror movie where no one dies. You can have a horror movie where very few people die, like The Shining. Its key thing is that not a lot of people get killed, but when they do get killed, they get fucking killed, you know. Like Scatman Crothers takes that axe, but the rest of it's build. And I think Until Dawn does that really well. It gives you the time to get like associated with these characters. Clock Tower does that really well in the opening of the PlayStation version. You spend a lot of time in like an office, like, and a fax comes through, and you're getting, you know, therapy for being part of the last Scissor Man attack and stuff like that. So those games, they work really well because they give you enough breathing room to get into the character's headspace or just get to know them in some way. And then when they die, it has a greater effect.
I mean, I once heard it described as the cross between the Scream movies and the suicide mission at the end of Mass Effect 2, when you've got to make all these choices about, and you don't really know. The game doesn't really telegraph what's going to keep people alive, so you've just got to try and make the best decision you can. And
with the information at hand, that's the best. Those are the best horror movies. The ones that are shit, the ones that are a bit like, oh, and then they go and do this. What they do is, at some point, the audience has a role in the movie. With horror movies in particular, because they're meant to be so primal, they're meant to scare you, but they can't scare you if the characters are meant to have the same knowledge you do, because they're substitutes for you. They're scared people in places. And that's why a lot of modern horror, or a lot of like tired sequels to say Halloween, they fold under their own pressure, under the pressure of trying to make, change the audience expectations. Because the old classic Scream, if you go up, why would you ever run upstairs? Why would you ever answer the door? Why would you ever do that? What Until Dawn does really well is it knows that you know those things. And Clock Tower, very similar. It knows you probably shouldn't be in a bathroom, but with the information at hand, that's all you can do, and that's your choices you make. And then you feel stupid afterwards if you're like, well, of course there's something in the trapdoor. Why did I not think about that? Right, we'll move it on, because obviously we can't talk forever about Until Dawn, but if you've not played it. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of Japanese horror. We can't talk about all of them, obviously. Just want to give a shout.
There's been a fair few.
Yeah, but we'll talk about Siren and Fatal Frame, Project Zero. And what I love about these kind of games is that there's in Fatal Frame and Siren in particular, there's a preoccupation with lenses, whether they be other people's eyes or a camera, and perception. So in Siren, you can sight jack people, and you can see where the enemies are looking. You can see where they're looking at you. It's similar to the horror movie The Eyes of Laura Mars, where the serial killer, she can see what he's seeing. And I think in that movie there's this like horrible chase sequence where you see it from the killer's perspective, but she can see herself running away. That's quite inventive there. And Siren has that. Siren's not actually, I wouldn't say it was a very good game. It controls very poorly, but it is very good looking for a PS3 game. And it uses that change in perspective well, because what it does is if we talk about the camera and the way a camera works in a game or a movie, you know that when you see something, say in Halloween, the most obvious example, Halloween, read about this recently, it's got a lot of negative space in it. You know from the framing where things are going to be coming from. It's obvious, but the dread is in knowing. So in that film, you have the knowledge, and I can't remember, I apologize, I'll try and find out who said this, but what happens is that with Halloween, and the person who said this was saying, it holds on that logic, like a dream logic, for so long, not like, oh, it's going to be coming out of the shadows, but then it holds for so long, you're like, when's it going to come out of the shadows? And then, but it's going to happen. And Siren does that as well, where you see yourself being from a perspective of something else, and it's very difficult to move, to rationalize, and you get that paralysis that people get in the other horror movies when you see it through You know, when they're like, oh, and don't run, like
Yeah,
say the
yeah.
opening of the original Friday the 13th, when it's like, why wouldn't you run away? And they're just like, oh, because you're being seen, you're seeing yourself essentially in that role.
Yeah.
It's very clever, and Fatal Frame, of course, has the incredible. It's very cute mechanic of you use the camera to dispel ghosts and all of that, and I love that as a framing mechanism, a quite literal framing mechanism for a horror game, in that you look through the camera and see the ghosts. How many ghost stories, especially in the modern age, are about technology seeing things that the human eye can't see and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, Fatal Frame as well, that's been running for a little while, but what I love is about those games and the Japanese horror there is those two conceits that are kind of similar, based around perception versus kind of what is reality in the frame.
No, absolutely.
Alien Isolation,
Yeah.
got to be mentioned. One of my favourite games, probably of all time. Just a game which
And
changes.
so recent as well. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
A game which is overlong, a game which does have demonstrable problems, but a game which is unbelievably primal in its power. That thing, the best movie tie-in of all time, like is, you know, and again a game where you live and die by your own decisions, and you know if they're stupid or not. But the key is that you finally get into that feeling if you were a teenager somewhere or someone, a space trucker, locked into this space. You're like, where I have to go, because you can hide in a locker forever.
Yeah,
But if you want to survive against the backdrop of things are blowing up or falling into the, gas giant bite, you got to move. And in a lot of it, there's no pressure. The game's not like, well, if you leave it running for 55 hours, it won't fall in. You know, you won't die.
Yeah.
But you want to do it.
That you know of.
Well,
You
yeah.
put that in.
Yeah, shit, maybe. But Alien Isolation, the way it stalks you is so good. It stays true to the film, but it also, again, I think with horror games and again, with horror films, it's the expression of the character you want to embody. So at the very end of Halloween, we keep bringing that, it's the archetypal horror movie, whatever.
It was a great departure from sort of Alien games.
But you almost always had a gun.
Well, they always took inspiration from Aliens.
Yeah.
They very rarely wanted to try and gamify the progenitor of the series, which was. I mean, Aliens is a wonderful action film, but I mean, Alien is arguably the smartest film in that series for what it.
Yeah, and when you come into Aliens, it is standalone, but you come to it in the knowledge that even if it is standalone, there's so much exposition in the first hour. There's so much exposition, quite cleverly done, explaining how it operates. So if you've not seen the original, but you get that kickback. You're like, oh yeah, I know how this thing fucks. So you get that fear building because you're like, there's thousands of these things, right? So even with Aliens, that movie is the same film as Alien, but they just have guns for a little bit. It's still a bunch of desperate people whose technology fails them. Technology fails Dallas. Technology, fails Ripley when she wants to turn off the self-destruction sequence with Mother. Technology fails them by pure sabotage in case of Ash in the original movie. So yeah, there's that. So Alien Isolation, fucking brilliant. Eternal Darkness. This is the game which is very Lovecraftian. The kind of overall setup is you arrive at a house which your grandfather or family member used to live in.
You need your one cat on to talk about this, don't you?
Yeah, they've died, but they're part of something bigger, and that something bigger is a centuries-old fight for fight against good and evil.
Yeah.
And so at the start, there's a Roman officer who finds these three artifacts, and in the meta-narrative, he finds these three artifacts, and you choose one, and you become death, essentially, and then there's a gigantic, super kind of natural force that can devour the universe. So, it's Lovecraft, right? That's that sort of shit, right? But what it did really well is it would constantly use the same locations, hundreds of years apart.
Right,
and so you come back to the main mansion with the woman whose name I forget brilliantly. But each time you kind of find an artifact in the house, you read that story in like a kind of Evil Dead style Book of the Dead. And then you're transported back to play as that. And it's like the First World War. And then there's a monk like years before that in the same church. And then years later, centuries later, that church becomes like a field hospital for wounded in the First World War, and you hear the screams and the bombing outside, and then it goes as far forward as like 1991 with the Gulf War, where some soldiers find this artifact hidden underneath, or this rune essentially, that sort of thing, buried in the Gulf. That sort, and it's really cool. It just uses the same environments which change to move you through the timeline and tell the story of this eternal battle against eternal darkness. And the sanity means when you encounter enemies, your character gets scared.
Yeah.
And if they get too scared, if this meter tops out, then things start happening. So the most famous one is probably where the game says it's wiped your save, which is amazing. Or it'll reset and restart the game, and you're like, what the fuck? And it does all of that really well. Like I say, like with a lot of these old horror games, they've not aged amazingly well. A lot of the combat in Eternal Darkness is quite clunky. Some of the puzzle mechanics are also very fucking annoying. It's that very old school sort of, you weren't thinking like the man who designed it. But it does that so well with the time hopping stuff and all of that. Fantastic. Right, PT. Just a quick shout out to PT, because look, we talked about PT a lot. PT is that game which is the perfect Twitch game. We talked about that before. We talked about how if you wanted to be, like in the past, if you wanted to be scared, you would go into a theatre and you would watch a film and watch people pretend to be scared. Whereas now with games like PT and Five Nights at Freddy's and all of those, you go in and you watch people on Twitch actually being scared. Amazing stuff, but we're running out of time. Of course, we couldn't say anything without mentioning the original Resident Evil. Now, with the Resident Evil sequels being very action-focused, I feel like the first one hasn't lost, but in the crush of talking about the amazing Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil 2 or 3 or 5 or fucking 6 or any of them, you kind of lose what was so amazing about the original Resident Evil. And I think that when you go back and play the remaster, of the remake, you're like, oh my, like it's a beautifully shot game, and it is shot. It's meant to be shot like a movie, and it is. And I won't babble on about Resident Evil for too much longer.
You will.
I've done it.
Stop you.
I've done it a lot. But when going back and playing that the mixture of kind of a Western horror, zombies, etc., directed by a Japanese man at a Japanese firm, is very interesting, and how the characters are motivated, what happens, why they do it. That great thing that I always mention in Thomas Wilde and Dan Burley's Resident Evil breakdown. It's like hundreds of pages long. It's like a plot analysis where one of them says, you may ask yourself why, if they have a shotgun, they don't just blow the hinges off the wooden door that's keeping them from getting through to safety. And their description was, in Western cinema, things happen and then they're explained. In Japanese cinema, and some of it at least, things just happen. And so that's really the justification. It's just you step into a world, and in a lot of Western stuff, people demand justification, even in the framing of things. Even in, like we said, the mise en scène, or even, that's why there's so much fucking backstory in, like, a lot of, like, The Matrix. So we say, Halo 5 apparently got loads of it. But in a lot of the Japanese stuff that they were pulling from, Dan Burley and Thomas Wilde, when they were talking about it, like, we watched these Japanese horror movies, and, like, it just happens. Those are the horror games. There are hundreds more we could have mentioned. Stuff like, I Have No Mouth, Must Scream. A lot of the Amnesia games, they are all great games. But these are the games we want to talk about.
Star Trek Voyager Elite Force and Jeffrey Super Sick. That was the scariest game I've ever played. Yeah?
Well, I mean, even games that aren't necessarily horror, but are horror themed. You mentioned The Darkness before, that bit where your girlfriend gets her brains blown out, and you've been all powerful to begin with, but now your power means nothing.
Up until that point, it's essentially a growing kind of power fantasy. And you're becoming a force of nature, and then all of a sudden the game has established this character as being very, very rounded out, very three-dimensional. There's even famously a scene where you kind of snuggle up to her on the couch.
I can watch the entirety of To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah, and you can you can spend as much time as you like doing that, and really goes to great lengths to establish a real feeling relationship in that world that you have. And then takes it away from you in the most horrific way. And I don't think I've ever quite felt more helpless in a video game than that moment. That was incredibly well done. The horror elements in The Darkness, I feel, apart from that one, which I think is sort of what a lot of people might call sort of true horror.
There's a lot of body horror stuff, isn't there?
Yeah. There's a
Like
lot of kind of schlock
in the sequel
stuff
as well. You're
and-
getting like at the start or towards the beginning, you're being like.
The most
strapped into
horrific
a
thing about
fucking
the sequel was the fucking
crucifix.
cell shading, but
Hey man, I like the fucking second game.
I like the second game as well.
The second game
I
does
like
have that-
fucking impaling people with cues and shit.
The second game does have that
Yeah.
kind of over like psychological horror again, and where you're in the asylum and you're not sure whether it's all true or not. And I actually think they bottled it by making it an ending where it kind of was all true. I killed myself at the end of the darkness too, or tried to, and really liked that ending. But anyway, look, we're out of time because the internet's run out of time, because it's lunchtime.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
thanks for listening. I'm sure we've missed out one of your favourites, so just bang it in the comment below.
Yeah, and
and
basically, if we've made you happy, if we've upset you, then do point it out in the comments, and we'll laugh at it.
and like it and share it, bros.